Hello, and thank you for joining us today for the webcast, Weathering the Storm, Leadership in Times of Uncertainty and Upheaval. My name is Pharma, and I'm with the content marketing team here at Pharma Intelligence. Before we jump in, let's go over some housekeeping items. First, if at any time you're having technical difficulties, click on the Test Your Connection button, and this will take you to the connection checker and FAQ page. If you are still experiencing any issues, there is a Chat Now function in order to go through to the support team who can assist. There will be a Q&A at the end of the presentation, so if you have any questions, we want to hear from you. Type your question into the question window toward the bottom of your screen and then hit Submit. We'll be answering as many questions as possible during the Q&A, and if there are any that we have extra that we are unable to respond to, we will do so via email. Because we know you'll want to listen to this webcast again, today's session is being recorded and will be available to view on demand following the event. Now, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Ben Comer, editor of In Vivo at Pharma Intelligence. Ben is responsible for biopharma industry coverage. His areas of focus include commercialization and R&D strategy, regulation, policy, and social issues impacting the sector. Prior to joining In Vivo, Ben was a senior manager at PwC's Health Research Institute and senior editor at Pharmaceutical Executive Magazine. And with that, I'll hand things over. Ben, the floor is yours.
All right. So I just wanted to reiterate what Afamia said about entering questions. Please feel free to submit those throughout the presentation, and we will try to get to as many as we can at the very end. I'm extremely excited to introduce the panelists for today's session. We have a diverse group of leaders with coming to this conversation with different perspectives. So I'm excited about this discussion. We first have Mark Reisenauer, who is president of Astellas Pharma. Mark is responsible for operations across the U.S. for Astellas Pharma, and recently or previously worked in the oncology business unit on a number of Astellas's oncology drugs that many of the folks listening would recognize. He's been instrumental in bringing several of those to market. Next, we have Pamela Stevenson. Pamela is Chief Commercial Officer at Albireo. She has more than 20 years of biopharma commercial functions and disease areas. Prior to Albireo, she was Vice President of Global Market Access and Value at Vertex Pharmaceuticals, another rare disease company where she led global market access and pricing, a critical function for a rare disease company. Next, we have Semi Trotto, General Manager of Thrive, which has recently become an Exact Sciences company. Semi's background includes more than 20 years of experience in human resources, focusing on talent management and talent acquisition, leading change and transformation, and executive team coaching and development. Next, we have Catherine Owen. She is Senior Vice President of Major Markets at Bristol Myers Squibb. Catherine oversees commercialization operations in 19 key markets, including Japan, Canada, and Europe, and covers the company's portfolio of innovative prescription medicines in oncology, hematology, cardiovascular, and immunology. And then last but not least, we have Anthony Higham, President of BTG Specialty Pharmaceuticals. Anthony has over 30 years of experience in senior roles at both big and small pharmaceutical companies. For the past 5 years, he's been in his current role at BTG Specialty Pharmaceuticals, which was recently divested by Boston Scientific and acquired by SERB, a private equity-backed European specialty pharmaceuticals company. And just before we go straight into our roundtable, I wanted to just give a quick overview of today's discussion. Leadership at corporations has a way of radiating out, from the top all the way throughout the company. And so I think there were a number of different ways we could have taken this discussion, but we've settled on 4 areas of discussion for today. The first is leadership communication strategies, setting the tone. The second is leadership during merger and acquisitions and team integration. The third is leading on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then the last area we're going to talk about is leadership in the context of a changing workforce. And then finally, we will have a Q&A here at the very end. So let me just exit out of my screen here and we will get the discussion started. I wanted to, as I said, start with communication, which is so important. It's interesting, communication, or good communicators, I feel like sometimes are undervalued, even though it's such a critical skill. Interestingly, everyone who's read emails or lots of emails on a daily basis knows that not everyone is a great communicator, but it's so wonderful when you do come across one. And I from a leadership perspective, it's even more important. We've all obviously been communicating virtually for the last, year and a half, more so than we had in the past. And while virtual communication is not something new at companies, COVID made it, mandatory and pervasive. And I'm curious about how, the panelists approached internal communications and or hiring after the pandemic set in. And I'll start with Anthony on that question.
Hi, Ben, can you hear me?
Yes.
That's great. So we've got the first technical glitch out of the way. I suppose we were relatively...
Anthony, I'm not hearing you. Are others hearing Anthony speak? No?
Can you hear me? There's quite a bit of backup on this line. Can you hear me?
Yes. You were. I could hear you, and then it cut out. But now you're back.
Okay, so this is hopefully the first and final glitch. I was just about to say, Ben. So we were reasonably fortunate within the BCG Spec Pharm business to have a reasonably well-established communications framework already in place. I think had people responded there and then in the heat of the moment when COVID first started to become apparent, I think establishing an effective communication platform would have been quite challenging in the circumstances. I think it's the classic challenge that you have. You only really do things when there's this compelling case. We took a conscious decision nearly 3 years ago to have a comms plan which involved town halls, pulse surveys. So we've focused long and hard in terms of employee engagement. And I think the benefit that we had with having this infrastructure in place when COVID did strike, we were able to pivot and respond very quickly. We would have literally daily COVID meetings. We would have formal comms going out from a small task force that we had created internally. Because one of the things that we did feel, and being pharmaceutical professionals, we felt that the messages that were often being given to our employees weren't clear, they weren't simplistic. And I'm saying this as running a biopharm business with multiple PhDs, as a former biochemist. So what we actually tried to do was to eliminate some of the confusion with our internal comms plans and try to educate our 300 employees that we had. And this almost became, we almost had this social corporate obligation, I think, to the broader term. We have facilities in Australia, in the US, and in the UK. And what we wanted to try and do as part of this internal comms was not only to educate, some of our employees, it was ability for these employees to go out within their respective communities and also have a very simplistic message that would also educate, people, because there was so much noise and there was so much confusion around. So for the first 6 months of COVID, the team met on a daily basis with the comms. What we have done now and where we're at this moment in time, we're down to one weekly update. At the monthly town hall, we try and educate people in terms of what the global rates are, so on and so forth. So we've continued with the education and the information over the last 15 months or so, and we don't see us changing that really for at least the next 6 months. Through one of our engagement tools, we have the pulse surveys, and we are able to poll people on as frequent as we want to, but we typically do it every 8 weeks. And this allows them that the vehicle then, if things are a little bit off kilter or off pattern, that we can modify there and then in terms of some of our communication themes. So again, we've retained this ability to pivot and respond quickly to any changes that we've experienced in the market. I think in terms of opportunities, it's not often that COVID and opportunities are mentioned in the same phrase, but we also made a very conscious decision that we wouldn't furlough people, for example, and we spent 5 months of last year educating people such as our territory sales managers to give them a new skill set, to make them much more adept at Teams or Zooms, because access into hospital was much limited. So we actually took this period of the worst COVID activity in the US as an opportunity to reskill. And certainly I think in the latter part of 2020, we came back and we had a very strong year, and we actually put that down to the investment that we'd undertaken within across the whole of the business, not just the US commercial sales organization.
Excellent. Thank you for those examples, Anthony. And I think your point, particularly on the importance of feedback from employees directly and calibrating leadership messages on that basis is a really important one. Pamela, I wanted to also get you in on this question. How did you approach internal communications and even hiring? Albireo is a growing biopharma company. How did you handle that during the pandemic?
Well, Ben, as you mentioned, at Albireo, it's been a year of tremendous growth. Since the start of the pandemic, we've doubled in size. We were about just under 50 employees when the pandemic set in, and now we're up over 100 employees. So all while we were trying to prepare to commercialize our first product in the US and in Europe. In terms of internal communications, nothing was more important than being transparent, having timely communications, and really embracing the technology, all with that goal of employee engagement and keeping everyone abreast of what was going on, what our vision was, what our strategy was, and being very deliberate in those communications. And I think, really important was just as a leader, embracing that technology, being a rapid adopter, modeling behaviors. So, whether you're tech savvy or not, being able to sort of understand, for us, it was Microsoft Teams. So we trained everyone really quickly. We kind of went through this sort of practice and learn, and did quick training sessions and things as, it sounds small, but like use of the chat function. As you're doing your town halls, are you engaging your employee base? Are you asking questions and asking everyone to respond and polling and getting that feedback and responding to the feedback? And so those, it may sound small, but those I feel were very important skills to keep the whole company engaged. And we did town halls, as Anthony has mentioned, very important company-wide town halls. We did them every other week to sort of introduce new employees in a way we might not have otherwise, but interview them in front of everyone, get to know them a bit. We provided updates through the town halls, and I think very importantly, we recognized people. We did that more so probably than we did pre-pandemic, just to, again, make sure that everyone felt that engagement and recognition and sort of worth, self-worth in terms of the effort they're putting into their jobs. We also had a weekly newsletter go out from our CEO where we reinforced the messages, we set the tone and really created the culture, right? Because we're trying to create this culture, and we haven't met half of the employee base in person yet, and so those were really important ways of getting out to our employees, keeping those lines of communication open, certainly through focus groups and listening to employees and hearing the needs from when we started working from home to now as we sort of return to office, and putting employee needs first and foremost, and ensuring that they know that we're supporting them through these transitions and listening to them.
Right. Thank you so much, Pamela. And engaging employees and making sure they're feeling involved, I know was probably more difficult during the pandemic. And I wanted to get Mark involved in this conversation. Mark, I wanted to ask, if there have been several already mentioned on the call, but what kinds of communication forums or tools were most effective for engaging employees during the lockdown? And was there any trial and error, any experimenting with things that didn't work or did turn out to work well?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Ben. I think the whole experience was trial and error going through the pandemic, and I think we did learn a lot. In terms of forums, I think the takeaway, at least from our experience, was having different forums was the key. It wasn't just one forum, and actually the smaller the forum, the better, if you could do it. And for us, it ranged all the way from the town halls that have been mentioned, which would be the entire organization, but it also went all the way down to one-on-one meetings, just with employees throughout different levels and departments of the organization. And we found that having that variety of forums was important. And I think the simplicity of communicating with them for the smaller meetings, obviously, whether it was Microsoft Teams or other types of technology, that certainly worked well. I think for us at least, where the experimentation came in was, how do you engage people, the larger groups? And it may sound easy, but I think in the early days of the pandemic, I think a lot of us probably experienced this, as everybody was rushing to have these big meetings and include the chat functionality. Bandwidth issues were clearly something that had to be overcome and you had to plan for. But I think we found a rhythm there and a way to do that in a way that we could effectively engage the larger groups as well.
Excellent. And Catherine, I want to get your take on this question too. Thinking about what happened at BMS, is there anything you would add in terms of, types of communication or trial and error and finding your way to, an effective way to communicate with employees?
Thanks. So again, I'm maybe pivoting a little bit from what Mark's just said. We have a very large employee base, over 30,000 globally, and within my group, just over 5,000. So trying to find the right way to communicate with a group that large, but that's also relevant. So what we pivoted between was the large employee meetings where it's more of a one-way didactic, because you even can't handle chat for 5,000 people. It just doesn't work. But we realized really quickly that during the pandemic, everything was hyper local and hyper specific to the person's country and situation. And so we pivoted really quickly from moving to, New Jersey-based broadcasts, which to my 19 countries weren't that relevant, to having much smaller broadcasts from our presidents in the countries and making the communication really relevant to the people that we were speaking to, because you really can't have one size fits all in a pandemic because it's so specific to the area you're in. So that was our biggest pivot point. And then along those lines, as we continued through the pandemic and people really started to struggle a little bit with the work-life balance and trying to understand what the new normal was and whether they were going to have a job, we pivoted to hyper small communications programs so that our presidents and general managers and heads of sales had really small meetings with groups of sort of 10 or less so that we could really have a better chat. So it was that kind of mix of that the local relevant messaging, as well as the very specific one-on-one interactions where we could really hear what people said, as well as our pulse surveys and all the other things large companies do. But I think that the trick was to get very local, very specific, and very relevant to me and my situation, whoever I am in our team, and really make sure that communication is relevant to those people.
Excellent. Thank you, Catherine. I'm sort of an optimist by nature, and so I'm constantly looking for the silver lining of things. And so I think there've already been some learnings mentioned just in respect to communication processes. Small groups are effective, maybe a little bit more labor intensive, but certainly in my experience, there's more engagement when you have a smaller group. But I want to move to you, Semi, with any thoughts about positive opportunities or new learnings regarding employee communications that came out of the pandemic? Do you have any silver linings for us you can share?
I think there were silver linings. I think first and foremost, what the pandemic showed was that this was a really tremendous opportunity to reinforce culture, which is one of the important things internal comms does. But the rubber really met the road in this moment for many people, because you needed to, and you've heard it in some of the comments so far, you needed to help people parse through a lot of noise to understand reality and facts. You needed to communicate with people honestly. You wanted to demonstrate empathy, because this was a moment where people were uncertain, not just about themselves, but about their loved ones and their communities. And you needed to demonstrate that people really mattered. And what did that mean for your organization? How did you take words and translate those things to action? So I also think the other big win is that from an inclusion standpoint, it really pushed organizations to have to know their people, because the diversity of the needs, whether it was because you had multiple geographies, whether because you had multiple demographics from an age perspective or from a family situation, all of those things mattered in this moment. And organizations needed to meet people where they were and think about the ways that they could deliver what your people needed so that your business could keep running and you could have business continuity and your teams could engage. So I think, with regards to some of the tactics and the channels, it also, the other silver lining is it gave you lots of opportunities to test lots of different channels and also understand how can you going forward best utilize those channels once we come out of the pandemic. Because I'm sure many companies tried many things. Some were wins, some were misses, but you have that insight now to take forward. And that's helpful, because when we think about work going forward, and I know that's not the topic here, but as we think about that and enabling a more flexible workforce, or really thinking about why do you bring people into an office, those tools become important then.
Excellent. Thank you, Simi. I want to move on to our second topic, which is leadership during merger and acquisitions and team integrations, and thinking about building alignment and maintaining mission. Several of the panelists that we have with us today have had the opportunity to lead through major mergers, acquisitions, or spinoffs, which is obviously a pretty high stakes endeavor. In terms of planning and executing team integrations, Anthony, I'll start with you. What are some of the fundamental components for leadership?
Thanks, Ben. So it's probably worthwhile just highlighting to people over the course of the last 3 years, the organization that the BTG Spec Pharma organization, we've been under constant strain. So in November 2018, Boston Scientific announced the acquisition of BTG. That took a little under 12 months to get through the UK takeover panel. We became part of Boston Scientific in August 2019. And then at the Christmas, we were informed that we were going to be put up for sale. The sale process lasted pretty much a year, and we finally transitioned into a new organization on the 2nd of March 2021. So it's been a very, very long road, I think, for everybody. What we've tried to do to keep people engaged throughout this period of uncertainty is we've had a very simple set of metrics, and we've referred to them as keeping pharma healthy. And these are really not really particularly financially biased. There's not your classic balanced scorecard. So the first one is about winning hearts and minds, because wherever we were going to be in that journey, we needed to retain people, because a key part in M&A strategy, I suppose, is to create value. Yet often we forget about the people when we're going through some of these processes. And I've certainly been exposed in my career to many examples where value has actually been destroyed because we've not put sufficient thought, emphasis into people. So when we talk about keeping pharma healthy, winning hearts and mind, the core part of that was actually comms. It was around these pulse surveys, and it's great to hear the consistency of today's panelists. The second element was fit for future. Is there will be life in 12 months' time. When we get through this period of uncertainty, we are still looking for commercial opportunities. We are looking to continue to invest in the R&D model. There's a third one, which was sharpen the axe, which obviously I must have been having a bad day, but that was still, we needed to focus on the basics. We still needed to focus on delivering against the budget, what our P&L needed to look like. So there was an element of focus on this, and we were very, very open and very transparent on a monthly basis in terms of how we were progressing against how are we going to keep pharma healthy. And I think it's this focus on some of the softer elements of bringing organizations together, because you all tend to get focused on the very hard, fast, mechanistic in terms of project management offices and delivering against milestones. I think they're as valid, because again, I think for people, for their own personal resilience, it's great to understand when something starts, when something finishes, and what actually success looks like. So I still think that's the key part, but for ourselves, we put a huge amount of effort in terms of keeping pharma healthy. And then I think when COVID struck, and then when the sale happened earlier this year, I think we'd actually created a very resilient workforce with our open and direct approach with the overall organization. So hopefully, he says, fingers crossed, I think we've certainly been able to retain key managers. And just as a stat, we've lost one person out of 300 people out of the last 2 years. So I think the metrics also tend to speak for themselves.
Excellent. Thank you, Anthony. And Catherine, I want to bring you into this question. Folks may have heard about the BMS acquisition of Celgene, something that you're working on directly. What would you say, Catherine, about the fundamental components of planning and executing, in this case, a very large transaction?
Yes, so if you can imagine the years leading up to the big official date, which was November 2019, where the official merger started to occur. And then, of course, less than 2 to 3 months later, we're all in global lockdown. So we were literally integrating our 35,000 employees globally, and all the businesses, all the systems, everything that's incredibly complicated during a merger during the global pandemic. So it's been a really interesting ride for the last 18 months, and one that I think we've learned a lot of lessons. But just to build on some of the points that Anthony mentioned earlier, with a company his size and with a company of 30,000 employees, the acquisition was really about the people and ensuring that the value that BMS was trying to drive through the acquisition of Celgene was not only its pipeline and its amazing products, but its people. And so the focus on them was the core of everything we did last year. And one of the first things we did was bring together the two company values and recreate the new BMS. And so everybody felt a part of the new values, the new focus that we had together. And so we did a lot of that from the top down. But what was really nice was we had global and country and then district and field level cultural ambassadors. So there was like a top to bottom integration of the whole cultural journey, the whole communication program. And so everybody at every part of the country and in the company played a role in our overall integration. And it was that sort of connectedness, not only top down, but bottom up, that really allowed us to learn and pivot. And so we were able to tap into our country and sort of field ambassadors and find out what's going well, what's going wrong, what do we need to do differently, and pivot through the whole of last year to ensure that people felt part of the process. And so it has been, an up and down. Things have gone really well. There are some things and lessons learned along the way, but overall, I'm incredibly proud of the journey we've been on and the ability during that time to have launched seven new products in Europe as well. And everybody on this panel knows what that looks and feels like. During an integration and a global pandemic, it's just been an amazing achievement, and all of that through ensuring that we come together as one company with one culture. So it's been a great ride.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that. That's an enormous endeavor, and I appreciate you sharing some of your experience with us. Simi, I want to go to you on this question of, and the added layer of complexity in managing company integrations, during the pandemic. Thrive was acquired by Exact Sciences. Thrive is a early cancer diagnostics company, and I wonder, what you might say, about any adjustments you had to make, or what you learned as you're, working on this integration as the company that has been acquired.
Yeah, no, and it was, we knew, we moved very fast. So we announced the deal in October of 2020, and we closed with the acquisition on January 5th. So there was a very short amount of time in which we were working to bring these two organizations together. And so we were fortunate in that, Catherine spoke to the cultural piece. The cultures between Exact Sciences and Thrive, although the words were different, the themes and the were very much aligned, both in terms of the mission and the values. So that was tremendously helpful as we thought about bringing the organizations together. When we were planning for the integration, we obviously had a dedicated team that was made up of both Exact Sciences and Thrive team members. And we knew, because we were doing this in the pandemic and we didn't have the ability to pull people together in the same way, there were a lot of really important things that we couldn't plan for face to face around relationship building, celebration, engagement. We also knew that we couldn't overload people with Zoom meetings, right? And keeping them for days in front to get them oriented to new systems. So I was really happy because our Exact Sciences colleagues were really open. And again, it's no different in a smaller company. Your goal is to retain the value and to drive value, enhanced value in pulling these organizations together. And people are absolutely critical in making that happen, whether you're big or small. And so we were very thoughtful about the integration roadmap and really defining it as a roadmap. So everything didn't need to happen on day one. We thought a lot about what do we need people to know? What do we need them to do? How do we want them to feel at different time points along the way? And then try to really pare down in those moments what was going to matter most and set people up for success on day one, on week one, on month one. So plucking it out that way and getting commitment that for as fast as folks may want to move, giving the space to do this right and letting the teams integrate well was going to end up being most successful in accelerating our business and accelerating people feeling part of Exact Sciences and settling in. And so we were very intentional with that. And we've done work then as we've started to come together to make sure that we're finding those opportunities to put teams together to start working, so that even though we couldn't do something big up front, we found the opportunities to start connecting our teams in the work to help drive the integration and then build the relationships at all levels. And that's been tremendously successful. So we're 4 months in, and overall, I'm happy. We have not seen any spikes in turnover. We've continued to drive our business forward. We are in kind of an R&D stage. There's a lot of work that's going on around the development of our assay, planning for clinical trials, thinking about access. So all of that work has progressed, and we have not seen business disruption, which was one of the things we absolutely wanted to avoid as a small growing company.
Great. Well, congratulations on that, and and best of luck going forward. Pamela, I want to bring you in. I mentioned already that Albireo is a growing, rare disease pharma company, and the company has a product that's out licensed in Japan, but now you have a late stage clinical pipeline where you're preparing for a launch potentially as early as this summer, and so as a result have had to forge a number of partnerships in different areas around the world. And I wonder what you would say about how you manage those kinds of commercial function integration so that all of the pieces fit together into a cohesive working whole.
Well, Ben, getting a product approved and commercializing successfully is challenging in the best of times for a small and rapidly growing biotech. But add in the pandemic, and we had to be really smart, have a clearly defined strategy and move quickly and sort of adapt as we went. And so, with our global commercialization strategy, it included sort of looking and identifying local partners, as you say, could help us execute our strategy. And we were very deliberate about defining what we were looking for in a partner, and defining capability, and then aligning on mission and culture. And so we really were able to define and execute on that and get to the point now that we have potentially different partnerships in place, and we're working on the integration, right, of the companies and the teams. And so in the US, as an example, in addition to hiring and training our own sales team, we entered into a limited sales agreement with Travere Therapeutics and their sales team. And their sales team has been calling on the pediatric hepatologists, which are our call point, since 2015. And so we had our sales team, their sales team, bringing them together to kind of help accelerate our fast start launch in the US, reaching more doctors more quickly. So there, what the integration of team looks like is really being clear about expectation, getting the sales leaders together very often to work through their territory business plans together. And then, quite frankly, as things have opened up recently in the US, getting the teams together in person, and building that relationship that is so critical. Now, outside of the U.S., we've built our team in Europe and Germany, and specifically, but we are going for the global commercialization opportunity, looking at markets outside of Europe, in addition to inside of Europe, to expand into those markets. We have partnered with commercial distributors who are able to be extensions of Albireo in areas like Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Israel. And so there, the integration is a little bit different. We have spent a lot of time with the teams in those companies in terms of getting to know each other, setting the strategy, very clear on sort of what our expectation and sharing learnings. They have the local learnings, we have the therapeutic learnings. And I think, as has been mentioned, that sort of integration of culture and team, making sure that we're spending time together and it has to be in these cases, it has to be virtually, but spending time celebrating, getting to know each other, and being probably more specific than we would have in other circumstances around, how the functions are going to work together. And spending that time just getting to know each other, because we're all about being, on this sort of journey together and having an aligned mission towards serving our patients.
Excellent. Thank you, Pamela. We are now going to move to our third topic for today, which is leading on diversity, equity, and inclusion in the context of a heightened global awareness. As everyone knows, protests following the killing of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and others last spring and summer reverberated across the globe. Corporate leaders and even major biopharma industry trade organizations have spoken up in the last year about issues of systemic inequality. And I think it's re-energized the desire among leadership to really address inequities when it comes to workforce, as well as in areas like drug development. Mark, I want to start with you. How is Astellas dealing with these issues internally, and what do you think still needs to be done?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Ben. We were working on accelerating our diversity and inclusion efforts prior to last summer, but certainly the events of the summer helped to accelerate a lot of what we were doing. And a couple of things on the internal front that I would highlight that we've been doing. Some of it's pretty straightforward, things that certainly I think a lot of companies are doing, but I think it's maybe taking a slightly different approach on how to address it. And first and foremost, taking a look at our own workforce data, looking at that at a regular basis in terms of representation, hiring, retention, things like that. Reviewing it regularly, but probably more importantly, sharing that with the broader organization so that they understand the transparency and our commitment. The other thing that is important is then how do you address these inequities? And the way that we've done it, and we've had really good success, is that we involve not only cross-functional but a cross-representation group to help solve these issues. We've created what we call a 3-year people strategy, and we have work streams associated with hiring, retention, and development of our employees. And we have these diverse teams that are working on this, and we have a diversity and inclusion lens on all of their activities. And this is so important. It has become part of our US objectives from myself on down. And so we have that level of visibility and transparency. Kind of at also maybe a pretty smaller level, we have launched implicit bias training across the company in the US. We find that that's extremely important. And also making commitments internally as well as externally. For us, we certainly stand behind Pharma's commitment around diversity, equity, and inclusion, especially as it relates to clinical trials. And we also signed the CEO Action for D&I pledge. So we think those are very important. On the clinical trial front, again, this was an effort that's been ongoing and has certainly been accelerated. Here, it's a couple of highlights. One, we have a patient centricity organization within our company that really helps to serve all functions. And the development team has been working with them to really help with the communication of trials externally via websites, et cetera. We also work with patient advocacy organizations to help announce and educate groups on the availability of our trials. And then lastly, just making sure we have sites in diverse communities as well. So just a high-level sampling of some of the things that we're doing.
That's great, Mark. Thank you. Catherine, I want to go to you next and maybe just ask you to, reflect on your time at PMS as well as your past experience. The question is how the corporate agenda on diversity, equity, and inclusion has evolved over the past 5 years in your view, and what, if any, emerging metrics exist to assess the effectiveness of these kinds of programs.
I think it's interesting to reflect back. I've been working in the US now for about 18 years, and all of that, apart from the last 2, was at Johnson & Johnson. And so I'm both with J&J and BMS. I've seen the D&I kind of story evolve quite rapidly, but then in the last couple of years, really sort of pivot again. And so I think from my perspective, what I've seen is, back in the day, there was a lot of focus on our internal employee group and making sure people felt represented. So, people-based resource groups, making sure that we were encouraging those types of groups to come together and raise awareness of the issues that they saw in their specific people entities. And then over the last couple of years, I think what we've seen a pivot to, especially, based on the activities of last summer in the US, is this real now drive to be much more transparent and open about our accountability to D&I. And I think that's the key now for us, is that accountability to ensure that not only do we talk about it, but we walk the talk. And so for us, it's absolutely pivotal to ensure that we're being transparent and accountable. So we've put out our first ever transparency report out into the open to share with everybody our commitment to diversity and inclusion, and how strongly we believe that once we're transparent and accountable, we can attract that top level talent that we want to into BMS. So it's like a two-way street. You know, we have to attract the talent, but we then also have to retain the talent. And I think the other thing that I've seen as a trend is a really heavy emphasis on diversity. But now in the last few years, inclusion is such an important part. If you don't have the I, the D doesn't really matter, because those people join your company and then within a couple of years they've left because they don't feel included. And so that focus now on inclusion, on ensuring that we're doing everything we can to have people bring their best selves to work, that they feel like their voices are heard. And so not only is it unconscious bias training, but it's also a much broader than that. It's embracing different leadership styles. It's embracing different cultures, different ideas, and ensuring that we're not shutting people out. And so I think, you know, for me, it's that change on accountability, but also reinforcing the importance of inclusion in everything that we do.
Excellent. And I want to bring some of our panelists from the smaller and younger companies in on this issue. Our colleagues at larger pharma companies, you know, in comparison, you may not have, you know, the same kind of budget or legacy D&I programs as the larger companies do. And I'm curious about your thoughts on, you know, just on how you get started. And Simi, maybe I'll start with you on that question.
Sure. So I'll start by saying I don't think budget and D&I, you don't need to have a big budget to embrace D&I. We were, as a young company, we knew from the beginning that we had multiple sites and that we had a diverse workforce as we were initiating the company. We had a board that cared about this. We had a leadership team that cared about this. We knew it mattered to our employees. And so part of what we did from the start was we talked about it as part of who we were and part of the fabric of what it meant to be in this organization. And when we hit 50 people, I wanted to get to a certain size before I started showing numbers and metrics. But when we hit 50 employees on our team, we started to, in every monthly team meeting, we showed information about demographics of our workforce so that we had a way to be transparent and talk about it. And there were places where we did well, there were places where we wanted to do better. And we wanted to engage our team to be part of that because it was part of who we were. So creating to some of the comments that I've made, creating transparency, making it part of the dialogue. I also think, you know, one of the things that we definitely saw over the summer was that it opened up, it was important that we opened the space for the right conversations to happen and really listened, right? Like there were moments as we saw some of the events unfolding where our employees needed to have the space to talk about it. And it gave us the opportunity in supporting those conversations in a very grassroots way to let people understand and have greater awareness and therefore kind of offer greater empathy to their colleagues and their teammates, because you may not have understood how someone was experiencing being in our organization. And understanding that allowed you to then partner differently, allowed you to operate differently to create a more inclusive environment for your colleagues. So talking about it and then finding ways to translate that not into actions that mattered. So you can do a ton of activity in this space and have no impact. It's the biggest danger. So making sure that you are very intentional in the actions you do take, that you really understand the impact of those actions, and they're the ones that matter for your people and your business, to me is one of the things that we've tried really hard. And as we've come together with Exact Sciences, they are absolutely in the same place of focusing on listening. There's cultural pillars and pillars of inclusion that tie into the community and the work that they're doing. So that, again, it was very much an approach of let's listen first and then act in the right way versus just knee-jerk reactions and putting a lot of stuff in place that isn't really what's going to support our business and our people.
Yeah, that's excellent. And Anthony, I'll ask you perhaps to weigh in next on this. How are you approaching the D&I issue at BTG?
Yeah, I'm glad that Semi highlighted this is about money. It's not around a budget. It's around essentially being a better person, a better human being, and I think that's what we're all trying to aspire to. And pretty much, as Catherine and Semi said, that I think it's very easy to talk about this. I mean, I know some of the conversations that we've had, making that first step as a business, you're not quite sure what you're going to say. You're not quite sure how people react. So I do think you can potentially overthink what you're trying to do here. So we've purposely gone to try and get actions in place. So the thing that we'll be introducing is we're going to introduce the same maternity leave policy in the US as we have in the UK. It's the right thing to do. We don't need a working group to deliver that. So we've got a number of these small activities where I'm a great believer in actions speak much louder than words. So we're being very much action orientated. I do think that those people, I think all organizations will face this, those people who pay lip service to this, who think they're just going to manage the next 10 years of their careers in ignorance of this, then I do think over the next few years we do need to start to change some of our management structures. That's clear, something that we do need to do. And I think until we start to take some of these measures and actively and proactively change the diversity on some of our leadership teams, that will take longer than necessarily needs to. So definitely actions speak louder than words for myself on this subject.
Excellent. And we're down to 8 minutes left on this webcast. I think we could have extended it to a longer session, but because of that, I'm going to go ahead and move on to our final topic area, which is leadership in the context of a changing workforce. Upskilling and motivating new workers. And I have to admit a certain amount of skepticism on conversations about the generational gap and how different a millennial workforce is from the existing workforce. But I do think that it's fair to say that there are different motivations and different kinds of skills entering the workforce with the younger generation. And I'm curious, what you might say about creating an engagement and importantly, a productive work environment, and also leverage those new skills that are coming in. And Semi, maybe I'll start with you on that one.
Sure. So I would say we definitely have multiple generations, even in our small Thrive workforce, and now much broader as part of Exact Sciences. But importantly, the anchor for us is the mission, and I imagine that's the same for many. That is transcends any of the generations, because people are coming to do something that they believe in a very profound way. For us, it was about changing the face of a cancer diagnosis and the impact that could have. It was the number one reason why people came in our door, regardless of the generation that they came from. Knowing that we had multiple generations, though, it was important to make sure that we did know our team and what mattered to them and what mattered for our business. So understanding near term how we needed to build the company and think about the capabilities long term, and how could we look ahead to the workforce we needed, not just for today, but for tomorrow, and then make sure that the programs and tools we put in place supported that, whether that was around the kinds of benefits we put in place because we had young families who may have different needs, whether that was around learning and development and the capabilities we put around folks who may be managing teams for the first time, or we're quickly going to have direct reports, investing early in capability building around things like development, difficult conversations, in addition to technical capabilities. We developed career ladders very early on so that we could engage people quickly around what they needed to do to be able to grow their career, not just in an upward fashion, but in a lattice fashion, and building out the breadth of skill sets. And a lot of what we did, we always focused on making sure the organization understood how we thought about something versus what's the process or the tool, because we were growing so rapidly that the one thing I could tell people very consistently was the process, the tool, the template will change. So don't get excited about it, because it won't be there in 6 months. But how we think about it and what it means to us should stay for longer. And so make sure you understand that and can get behind how we're doing, whether it's promotions, career development, manager capability. And we'll make sure at any given moment when we're 25, 75, 150, that the way we deliver that makes sense for the organization. So those were some of the things that we did to try and make sure that we were broadly including all of our employees in the things that we were trying to deliver and engaging them, but making sure that all of that was not just about our people, which are critically important, but our people and driving our business forward.
Excellent. And Catherine, I want to turn to you to find out, what kinds of, reflecting on your experience, what kinds of corporate programs do you favor for, fostering new talent, or teaching leadership skills even? Are there certain corporate programs that you feel are really effective, or alternatively informal mentoring networks?
Yeah, no, so I think there's a couple of points just to make here quickly, is that many of the large pharma companies do have formal sponsorship programs, whether it's sort of management development programs, whether it's diversity sponsorship programs. There's a myriad of different sponsorships in place, and it's that formal relationship between you and somebody who you're given as your sponsor. And those can be a little bit hit or miss. They're definitely good and they definitely have their benefits, but depending on that chemistry between you and your sponsor, they can be useful or they can maybe be a little bit blah. What I found, I think, in my sort of 25 years plus now in the pharma industry is that a mentorship is where I would kind of push people, and that's to build your own personal advisory board. So no matter what company you're in, large or small, no matter what part of your career you're in, early, middle, late, is branching out and using people to build your own personal advisory board, whether that's people you've worked with now, people you've worked with in the past, whether it's headhunters, whether it's people that you meet on panels such as this, whether it's people that you can reach out to on LinkedIn. I've found that those types of relationships, which you build over time and you have chemistry and you can build a relationship of trust and honesty, are the ones that have fulfilled me the most. And it's certainly where I spend my time now in terms of the mentees that I have. It's giving them that honest, practical advice based on my experiences, but also encouraging them to ask other people. In terms of clinical trials, my point of view is N equals 1. And so I really encourage people to really spread their wings and think about different types of people to get career input and advice. And I think that natural chemistry is the key to those relationships.
Excellent. And with just 2 minutes left, I want to just quickly get Pamela in here. I think one of the benefits of working in the pharmaceutical industry is the clear purpose that exists for workers. It's sort of obvious you're working toward the production of a drug that's going to help people. And Pamela, I wonder what you might say, just about with a drug that is potentially going to be approved later this summer. How does leadership in the market access arena, I guess particularly with respect to rare drugs, translate back into employee impact?
Well, access to medicines is so important. It's critical to our success as a business, but it's also, of course, critical for patients and physicians. But what I've come to understand is that it is so important for employees to understand. They are engaged in this mission of bringing a medicine to the populations around the globe, and access and understanding access and understanding the company's approach to pricing and to the approach to market access is very important across all of your employees. So, doing across the company training and education about pricing, specifically in a rare disease market, I found in my career to be just so important and critical, and will, especially in a small company where everyone has kind of worked so hard to get the product through the development stage and now out to the market. Very important to have everyone understand about what goes into market access.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. We're going to have to leave it there. I really appreciate all of your participation in the panel and the excellent examples you provided. We're right here at the top of the hour, so I'm going to turn it back over to Afamia for our final housekeeping and just say thank you again.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you to our panel today. for that informative session. As a reminder, a recording of today's session will be emailed to all registrants and available to view on demand. On behalf of Informa Pharma Intelligence, thank you again for joining us and hope you have the rest of your day.